The Dutch Republic was a confederation of 7 provinces, which had their own governments and were very independent, and a number of so-called Generality Lands. These latter were governed directly by the States General, the federal government. The States General were seated in The Hague and consisted of representatives of each of the 7 provinces. Summary: when several provinces and cities in rebellion against Philip II of Spain declared themselves independent in 1581 with the Act of Abjuration, they initially aspired to appoint another prince as head of state. The sovereignty of the provinces was first offered to Francis, Duke of Anjou, but his 1583 coup d'état was foiled and he was ousted. After the assassination of rebel leader William the Silent, it was offered in turn to and declined by Henry III of France and Elizabeth I of England. Elizabeth did make the provinces an English protectorate and sent over the Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, as Governor-General. For many reasons, it was not a success, and Leicester left in 1588. This left the provinces in rebellion without a head. The provinces of the Republic were, in official feudal order, the Duchy of Guelders, the counties of Holland and Zeeland, the former bishopric of Utrecht, the lordship of Overijssel, and the free provinces of Friesland and Groningen. In fact, there was an 8th province, the lordship of Drenthe, but this area was so poor it was exempt from paying confederal taxes and, as a corollary, was denied representation in the States General. After the Peace of Westphalia, several border territories were assigned to the United Provinces. They were federally governed Generality Lands. They were Staatsbrabant, Staatsvlanderen, Staatsovermaas and Staatsovergelre. One should also not suppose the republican form of government was democratic, in the modern sense that every citizen had a vote. In the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries, the regenten were the rulers of the Dutch Republic, the leaders of the Dutch cities and the heads of organizations. Since the late Middle Ages, Dutch cities had been run by the richer merchant families. Though not formally a hereditary class, they were de facto patricians, comparable in some sense to that ancient Roman class. At first the lower class citizens in the guilds and schutteringen could unite to form a certain counterbalance to the regentin. But in the course of the 16th, 17th and 18th century, the administration of the cities and towns became oligarchical in character, and it became harder and harder to enter the caste. For the latter part of the 17th century, the regent families were able to reserve government offices to themselves via quasi-formal contractual arrangements. Most offices were filled by co-option for life. Thus the regent class tended to perpetuate itself into a closed class. However, in practice they had to take into account the opinions of the man on the street. Otherwise they ran the risk of being dislodged by political upheavals, like the Orangist revolutions of 1672 and 1747 and the Patriot Revolt of 1785. National government. The States General, or the Generality for short, was a descendant of the medieval Burgundian and Habsburg States Generals. In medieval times and under the Habsburgs, they met infrequently to discuss matters of common interest and to vote taxes for the benefit of the Dukes of Burgundy and the Habsburgers. After the abjuration of the king in 1581 and the separation of the northern Netherlands from the Spanish dominions, the States General replaced the king as the supreme authority and as the central government of the northern Netherlands, which then became known as the United Provinces. As alluded to above, this was an ad hoc arrangement since no prince would anger Spain by accepting sovereignty over the provinces. As the years went by, and the confidence of the governing regents and princes of Orange grew, the desire to be ruled by a foreign prince diminished. The style of address to the States General was codified by Johan de Witt in 1653 as the noble mightinesses, the Lord States General, or In Dutch, Den Heren Hoogmogenden, Den Heren Staten-Generaal der Verenigde Provinciën der Nederlanden. Each province was allowed one vote in the States General, and the Republic continued this practice. Each province could send as many representatives as they chose. However, the size of the meeting room limited the size of the delegations. The representatives were appointed for a term by the provincial estates and were not directly elected. Neither were they usually empowered to vote on their own decision. Referrals back to the provincial estates for a decision on how to vote were frequent. The system only worked when a talented councillor pensionary or stadtholder was able to arrange a consensus ahead of time. Meetings were held around a large conference table in the Binnenhof in The Hague, which was a central location and allowed easy travel back and forth to the other provinces. Of course, the states of Holland met in the same palace, so communication with them was easy, which also increased their influence. Each province served as presiding officer of the States General in turn. Given this weak executive structure, and the necessity to refer business for detailed review, the proceedings were often dominated by the councillor pensionary of Holland as the representative of the largest province, as well as the most well-informed and prepared official. Representatives of Holland as well as other provinces would often defer to his expertise. The States General conducted foreign relations, declared war and peace, administered the army and navy, and levied tariffs. In short, it did all those things that concerned the outward and common concerns of the Republic. But no more. It had negligible power internally, which was jealously guarded by the provincial states. One of the most important tasks of the States General was the appointment of the commander of the Republic's armies, the Captain General of the Union. The appointment was for life. William the Silent acted as chief commander of the army as the most eminent personage and the leader of the rebellion, but this was never formalized. His son, Maurice, was appointed Captain General as a counterpoise to Leicester. The Dutch were fortunate in that Maurice turned out to be a military genius and the foremost commander of his age. After that, it was a matter of course for the incumbent Prince of Orange to be appointed Captain General. The ability of the princes to deliver victory and protect the Republic from its enemies led to much of the political power. The failure of the latter princes to live up to this heritage consequently led to a large diminution of the power internally. Once the budget for the year was set, the percentage to be paid into the treasury of the Generality was set by tradition. As the largest, most populous, and richest province, Holland paid 58.3% of the required budget. The ability to provide this proportion of the Generality's funds is what gave the states of Holland the preponderance in the government. Zeeland contributed 10% to the budget, Friesland 11.7%, Utrecht 5.8%, Gelderland 3.6%, Overijssel 3.5%, and Groningen 3.5%. The poorer and more landward provinces were accessed less. The treasury of the Generality was administered by an official appointed by the States General, the Treasurer General. He chaired the Treasury Chamber of the Generality and kept its books. There was also a Receiver General who collected the taxes as well as the contributions of the member provinces. One of the key problems in this is that the Receiver General had no authority to enforce payment into the Treasury, and some of the poorer provinces were frequently in arrears. 20% of the new Republic's territory, known as the Generality Lands, was not assigned to any provincial council and had been conquered since 1581 from the Spanish. It was under the direct rule of the Generality, and not allowed to send representatives to the States General. As such, these territories had no vote in the States General. The Council of States of the Generality functioned as the executive committee of the Union, nation, and carried out its executive functions. It was descended from the councils of states formed by the Burgundian dukes and the Habsburgs. This incarnation was formed when Leicester became Governor-General. After he left, it was made subordinate to the States General, and functioned as a subcommittee of it. It formulated the budget, organized and financed the army and navy, and levied taxes throughout the Union. It consisted of 12 members, appointed by the provinces, for 2, 3, or 4 years as the individual provinces chose. Its members also tended to be the province's representatives to the States General, as the council was a subordinate to it. The councillors, in break with general practice, voted individually, not by province. Each councillor presided in turn, its members fixed by tradition to the Prince of Orange as Captain General of the Union's Army and Admiral General of the Navy. Holland 3 councillors, one of which was the Councillor Pensionary of Holland. Zeeland 2 councillors. Utrecht 2 councillors, Friesland 1 councillor, Overijssel 1 councillor, Groningen 1 councillor. The administration of the Navy of the Union and supervision of all its naval affairs was centered in another committee of the States General, the Council of the Admiralty. It was responsible for setting naval policy and budget. Members were appointed by the States General and consisted of the Prince of Orange as Admiral General of the Union, the Lieutenant Admiral General of the Union. This was second only to the Admiral General, and was the effective operational commander of the Navy. He was most important when there was no Admiral General. Prince of Orange appointed. Michael de Ruyter served as Lt. Admiral in his time. The Councillor Pensionary of Holland, whose influence here was greater than in the army, and paramount when there was no Prince of Orange. Johan de Witt effectively commanded the navy through this position. Others as appointed. For day-to-day administration of the navy, there were originally 3 different subordinate admiralties: Rotterdam, the Maas, southern quarter of Holland; Amsterdam, northern quarter; and Zeeland. To this was added the Noorderkwartier. In 1597 the States of Friesland established the Friesland. On 14 June 1597 the States General of the Netherlands approved a proposal in which the foundation of a Generality College was decided upon. This replaced an earlier Navy Board, the clergy superintendent, of which Maurice of Nassau, Prince of Orange, had been the head, but which had been dissolved in 1593 as a result of disputes between the provinces. The Generality College was to be a loose cooperation between 5 autonomous admiralties to be represented in it. Each admiralty also had its own hierarchy. However, most ships and money came from Amsterdam, and after that Rotterdam in Zeeland. The situation tended to lead to divided command in battle and duplication of efforts, which could only be resolved by a strong Prince of Orange, a councillor pensionary. One common confusion is that the office of the stadtholder was a national one. It was not. The stadtholder had been appointed by the sovereign in each province as his representative. In the absence of the sovereign, the provincial estates appointed the stadtholder. The term of office was for life. While it was held by the incumbent Prince of Orange, it was not made hereditary until the time of William IV. However, the Prince of Orange was not just another appointed servant of each of the provincial states, as the councillor pensionary was, nor not just another noble among equals in the Netherlands. First, he was the traditional leader of the nation in war and in rebellion against Spain as the direct descendant of William the Silent, the father of the fatherland. He was uniquely able to transcend the local issues of the cities, towns and provinces. He was also a sovereign ruler in his own right. This gave him a great deal of prestige even in a republic. He was the center of a real court like the Stuarts and Bourbons, French-speaking, and extravagant to a scale. It was natural for foreign ambassadors and dignitaries to present themselves to him and consult with him, as well as to the States General to which they were officially credited. The marriage policy of the princes, allying themselves twice with the royal Stuarts, also gave them an acceptance into the royal caste of rulers. The leaders in the individual provinces as well as the States General looked to him for leadership and guidance. A strong Prince of Orange could make the institutions of the Republic work efficiently. A weak Prince of Orange would contribute greatly to the weakness of the government and the Republic. The Dutch East India Company and the Dutch West India Company, as quasi-governmental organizations, were also under its general supervision, along with the provincial and city boards of governors of the corporations. Staten Island in New York City and Staten Island, Argentina, are among places named after the Staten-Generaal government of Holland. The province of Holland was governed from the earliest times by the provincial states. This was an assembly of all the commons and nobles to the sovereign, the Count of Holland. They also met in The Hague at the Binnenhof. The fact that the center of political power was also the de facto political center of the Republic gave them an advantage of the other provinces. In addition to the 58.3% of the country's budget they paid. In 1653 De Witt formalized the title as the Noble Great Mightinesses, the Lord States of the province of Holland and West Friesland. The fact that it was more laudatory than the States General above showed where the real power lay. The States of Holland met 4 times per year. Each city and town represented in the states had 1 vote, along with the College of the Nobility of Holland, which also had 1 vote. Each town could send as many representatives as it deemed necessary. The number of towns with voting privileges was originally 6. Dordrecht was the first in rank. Its pensionary acted as councillor pensionary if necessary. The others were Delft, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Haarlem and Leiden. The number of voting towns was increased by William the Silent to 18 to respond to the growing population. Those were Alkmaar, Den Briel, Edam, Enkhuizen, Gorinchem, Gouda, Hoorn, Medemblik, Monnikendam, Purmerend, Schiedam, and Schoonhoven. These were not changed until the end of the Republic. The same method was used to raise revenue as was used in the States General. Each city was charged its portion. Amsterdam paid almost 50% of the revenues budget of Holland. Given Holland's contribution to the Generality's budget, Amsterdam paid approximately 25% of the entire national budget alone. This is part of what gave that city its preponderance in national and provincial affairs. The nobility was not very numerous in Holland. Holland was not very heavily feudalized. However, they still had a certain amount of prestige in an aristocratic age. They also had many prerequisites by tradition, such as the right to be appointed to certain lucrative posts and sinecures. The hall was at the center of the Binnenhof. The nobility usually had 8 or 9 of the number as representatives to the states. The office of Chief Noble of Holland, an especially lucrative censure, although appointment was by the states. Some of its holders were Louis of Nassau, Lord of De Leck and Beverweerd, and Joan Wolfet van Brederode. They chaired the meetings of the states, as represented by the Pensionary, who was also councillor to the states as a whole. Hence the name Councillor Pensionary, or in Dutch Raad Pensionaries. This gave the Councillor Pensionary some of his power as he chaired the meetings of the states and spoke first as the representative of the nobility, as well as last in summing up the debates. He was also the only representative with a fixed term, an office, and the staff to prepare and study issues. The main executive functions of Holland were carried out by the Gecommitteerd Raden, usually translated as delegated appointed councillors. They formed a permanent committee of the states, with delegates from the nobility, one delegate represented by the councillor Pensionary, Amsterdam one delegate, Dordrecht one delegate, Rotterdam one delegate, Haarlem one delegate, Leiden one delegate, Delft one delegate, Gouda one delegate from 3 of the smaller towns, each of the 3 choosing him by turns. The councillor Pensionary exercised much of influence here, as he was again the only representative with a fixed term and office, and the staff to prepare and study issues, and then to carry them out. The States of Holland usually sent the following delegates to States General: 1 noble, perpetual, 2 out of the 8 chief, original towns, 1 out of the towns of North Holland, 2 from the provincial commissioned councillors. The councillor Pensionary of Holland, from his accretion of influence that went along with the committees, meetings of the States and States General that he attended, and his staff that allowed him to study and carry out decisions. The councillor Pensionary became by default the main executive official of the States of Holland and the States General. The councillor Pensionary was appointed for a fixed 5-year term, paid a salary, given a budget and a staff. This allowed him to study, propose, and carry out decisions of the states. He was not the leader, but as the pensionary of the nobility and the councillor of the states. A powerful councillor pensionary such as De Witt could shape the agenda, its outcome, and use his influence to persuade the other members of the states to vote for a particular policy, and then carry it out. The same carried through to the States General, especially as he tended to the face of the most powerful province, Holland. As he was tasked with carrying out decisions, it was natural for other bodies, both domestic and foreign, to meet with him and deal with him to get the states and States General to act on an issue. Most of the other provinces had their own pensionary. However, none of them had the ability to build up the power and influence of the Hollands, given Holland's influence in the Generality. The office of councillor pensionary was a continuation of the office of Lands Advocate of Holland. That office did much the same functions as the councillor pensionary did, chairing meetings of the States of Holland, acting in committee for them, preparing business and agendas, acting as speaker for the nobility, and acting as the legal counsellor and head of bureaucracy. The office started in the early 14th century and ended in 1619, when the title was renamed into councillor pensionary in response to the crisis of that year between the States of Holland, as represented by Johan van Oldenbarnevelt and the stadholder, Prince Maurice, which the states lost. The office of stadholder was a continuation of the Burgundian institution. Stadholders in the Middle Ages were appointed by feudal lords to represent them in their absence. Each of the provinces of the Burgundian Netherlands had their own stadholder, although a stadholder might exercise authority over more than one province. A stadholder was thus more powerful than a mere governor, who had only limited authority. In the 15th century, the Dukes of Burgundy acquired most of the Low Countries, and these Burgundian Netherlands were in turn mostly governed by their own stadholder. In the 16th century, the Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, also King of Spain, who had inherited the Burgundian Netherlands, continued this tradition as he had much wider interests in Spain, Germany and Italy. Stadholders continued to be appointed to represent King Philip II, his son and successor in Spain and the Low Countries. Due to the centralist and absolutist policies of Philip, the actual power of the stadholders strongly diminished. This was one of the causes of the Dutch Revolt, when, in 1581, during the Dutch Revolt, most of the Dutch provinces declared their independence with the Act of Abjuration. The representative function of the stadholder became obsolete in the rebellious northern Netherlands, the feudal lord himself having been abolished, but the office nevertheless continued in these provinces, who now united themselves into the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands. The United Provinces were struggling to adapt existing feudal concepts and institutions to the new situation and tended to be conservative in this matter, as they had after all rebelled against the king to defend their ancient rights. The fact that the stadtholder was William the Silent, the effective leader of the revolt, made the states determined to retain him and normalize his position. The stadtholder no longer represented the lord, the states retaining the sovereignty for themselves. He was appointed by the states of each province for that province. It was a provincial office. However, although each province could assign its own stadtholder, in practice the Prince of Orange, the direct descendant of William the Silent, was always appointed to be stadtholder of Holland, Zeeland, Utrecht, and Gelderland, and the Count, later Prince of Nassau-Dietz, a cadet branch, was appointed stadtholder of Friesland. Groningen and Overijssel appointed one of the other princes as the stadtholder. The highest executive power was exerted by the sovereign states of each province, but the stadtholder had some prerogatives, like appointing lower officials and sometimes having the ancient right to affirm the appointment of the members of regent councils or choose burgomasters from a short list of candidates, as these councils themselves appointed most members of the states. The stadtholder could very indirectly influence the general policy over the course of time. In Zeeland, the Princes of Orange, who after the Dutch revolt most often held the office of stadtholder, that held the dignity of first noble, and were as such a member of the states of that province, thanks to the fact that they held the title of Marquis of Veer and Vlissingen as one of the patrimonial titles. In times of war, stadtholder, who, since the Prince of Orange was also appointed Captain General and thus commanded the army, had much more influence and thus would have more power than the councillor Pensionary. This was often why the Princes of Orange tended to favor a policy of war against Spain of France versus a policy of peace. However, this was not actually the power to command, but the power to influence, persuade the states, and have their decisions accepted as those of the states. As said above, the ability of the 17th century House of Orange-Nassau Princes of Orange to influence and drive the states to a consensus lead to the leadership of the Generality. The inability of the Princes of Orange of the 18th century to do the same lead in great part to the fall of the Dutch Republic.